maybe a kind of first order question. When language matters, concepts matter, the way we talk about things matter. When we use a word like homelessness or a homeless person, what do we mean by that word? And what do we not mean by that word? Maybe we should start by talking about that, and also who the homeless are, and how they, of course, get into that situation where they're labeled homeless or lose their housing. So could we start with that first order question?
Well, I would say, first, whenever I hear anybody distinguish themselves as being homeless, I immediately say houseless, because it's a negative statement. It's a derogatory term. It's not. There's nothing positive, proactive coming from that. I sleep outside every night. I live in a 1,000-star hotel.
Thank you.
I'm concerned that the framing of this issue is skewed sometimes to the wrong direction, to my mind. I hear people say something like, oh, this homeless problem. And I go, wait. No, the problem is lack of houses. The problem is a 1% vacancy rate. The problem is not enough jobs that pay enough to be able to rent a typical apartment in Chico. Those are problems. People being house challenged, that's a symptom. That's not the problem. The problem is we need more jobs, we need more houses. That's the answer to the situation, is more houses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to be careful of othering when we use the words homeless people. Homelessness is a circumstance of somebody's life, and so we need to speak to it as that. I usually use people who are experiencing homelessness. That sounds a little better to me.
One thing that came up in our discussions earlier this week.
Excuse me, we really can't hear back here. Is there any way?
Thanks. Yeah, we're working on it.
Okay, very good.
Please.
In our discussions this week, it became apparent that there's a difference between experiencing homelessness and understanding homelessness. Most of us talk about homelessness, but most of us have never been homeless. I have never been homeless, but I know a lot about what it takes to address homelessness, and I know a lot of the issues that homeless persons confront. Generally, in our work, homelessness is something that's defined as not having a regular nighttime place to sleep. That includes shelters. A shelter is not considered a regular nighttime place to sleep. So that's typically the definition of homeless. Where have all of our homeless come from? I'll just touch by saying that in the 1970s and 1980s, we deinstitutionalized our institutions in the state and in the country. We felt it was inappropriate to, I should say, incarcerate persons without having committed a crime. So we've turned them loose on the streets, the institutional populations, with the promise that there will be housing provided and supportive services. Of course, some housing and some supportive services have been provided, but nowhere near what is needed. So right now, what we confront in Butte County, at our last count, we have about 1,900 homeless individuals and households we've found in Butte County. That number is a street count. We think that number could be as shy as 50% of the actual numbers we're working with. The last comment here.
Number again.
Okay, 1,900 households. And a household can be either one person or multiple people, just whatever group of people lives together. So that many people are homeless in Butte County, or experiencing homelessness today. Many of them are couch surfing, staying with friends or relatives. And in our experience down at the Housing Authority, it used to be 20, 30 years ago that we considered the homeless population very different than the population we serve in our low-income public housing in Section 8. But today, it is all one big continuous mass. We have about 40% of households in our area, and this is typical of California and typical of the nation, about 40% of households who are literally one paycheck away from homelessness. So we have an enormous amount of socioeconomic stress at the lower socioeconomic strata. It's not just the homeless we're talking about. We're talking about low-income Americans and potential opportunities for the future.
This first question, I'll try not to go on too long, but it's one of the biggest ones for me, because I feel like every question that comes down the line, whether it is a question of homeless problems, which there are, if you're living without a house, there are generally going to be problems you are more likely to face. I would say those are homeless problems. How do you stay clean? How do you get first aid? How do you make it to appointments? How do you do research? How do you keep your stuff safe? How do you go to the bathroom? These are homeless problems to me. And then the other problem is, like Charles said, those are housing problems. How do we solve housing problems? And that's a whole other arena, but related. And the urgency of the homeless problem, I think, is why so many people are drawn to work in housing now. But we can't, there are going to be people directly affected, and there's going to be people who are working directly in it. Some of those people are up here, a lot of those people are not. And I feel conscious tonight, actually, another person who just came out of 14 years of homelessness would have really liked to make it, but they're still struggling so much to stay in their housing that they're not able to make last minute plans. And I know there's a lot of other people sleeping on the street that I think would have liked to be here tonight, but now is not a convenient time to not be sheltered. So I feel conscious of that. But as a person who spends a little bit of time working with shelters like Safe Space, and now is spending most of my time in housing, it can be daunting to take these questions to the public, because immediately there is this us versus them polarizing thing that happens. So being able to answer these questions and understand these questions is huge. When we say, you're right, like there's so much negative attached to the word homeless. Unless you're in very certain circles, if you say a homeless person, you're going to bring up a lot of personal stuff from different people that really dehumanizes everybody going through that. And I think in this conversation and other controversial issues in this town, my first priority is to stop and humanize what's going on so that we actually can focus on whatever the solution is we're trying to get to.
Thank you.